Hi, Paul.
Hello.
So I'm going to confess now, I avoided watching the film for quite a few weeks. A number of my friends and family were like messaging me saying, you have to watch this film, you have to watch this film. But it just all felt a bit close to home. And then when I did watch it, I had to keep pausing it because the story, if you swap the genre of music, because I was a classical musician, I just graduated from the Royal Academy of Music in London here. When I got really ill and my hearing was very badly damaged, in a very similar way, very suddenly, kind of almost overnight.
Yeah, boy.
So it was like seriously powerful watching for me. But I often talk to hearing dogs about the fact that I have like a toolkit of things that help me cope with my hearing loss. Having a hearing dog is one of them.
Yes.
Technology is one of them.
Yes.
But actually this film is now added to my toolkit because I think it really helped people understand kind of what I went through. And it's those moments, particularly like with Ruben on his own, the moments you have on your own where you're struggling with the impact of it and your mental health and your kind of mental, I don't know, your drive and determination to find a solution and find a way to cope with it. So thank you. And just before we go any further, I got my hearing dog up next to me just so you could see him, but he's taken it all in his stride, meeting a Hollywood star.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
He's very chilled out at the moment. But he's trained to alert me to all kinds of sounds. So, so shall we crack on with the questions?
Yes, please. I'm so pleased to be with you this morning. This is great.
Obviously, like, huge congratulations from us all at Hearing Dogs on your Oscar-nominated performance. What was it about the script that made you really fight for the role?
Oh, my goodness. Well, when I first read the script, I was very moved, and it just struck me as being very sensitive to the journey of somebody that loses their hearing. I thought it was wonderful. And then at the end, I was just in tears. Just thought of my father, because my father was totally deaf from the age of 6 months. And I thought to myself, God, he would have stood up and have applauded this ending, because I remember when the cochlear implants first came out when I was a young man, way back in Chicago, and they were giving a demonstration of how they worked. It was a brand new technology. And my father was sitting next to me, and I said to my dad, I said, you want one of those? And he goes, no, I'm happy the way I am. Now, that's one philosophy. However, my mother was sitting next to him. She lost her hearing at the age of 5 years old from spinal meningitis. So she had already acquired speech, was very hooked into music, loved music. And my mother didn't comment. She just was watching. I could tell that she was intrigued by the idea. And over the years, as she got to be older and older and older, it did affect her mental health. She missed music so much. And my mother was interested in it still. Of course, she was already deaf for many years. But so then I would sign the songs for her, what was ever happening at the time, Elvis Presley, when the Beatles came out. She bought my first Beatle tickets to go see the Beatles. She bought my first electric guitar. You talk about the stillness. My father was very, very still, into the quietness of everything, perfectly happy. However, my mother was agitated, irritated, and missed it. So there's the difference, to see from one extreme to the other that I grew up with my deaf parents.
It's really interesting, those two different worlds from your mum and your dad, actually, because as I kind of got thrown into deafness, I very quickly realized there were quite different experiences, the ones where you're born deaf and the ones where you've been hearing, and you actually have to kind of go through a grieving process, which obviously is what Ruben went through in the film. So obviously with all these parallels with your own life, how much influence did you have on the way the characters developed for Joe and for Ruben?
I just thought it was cool the way, Ruben's having this experience, and then he runs into this sober house where the guy that's running the sober house has had the same experience. He's, in other words, a late deafened individual. So, God, just a beautiful story. If I might mention, within the deaf community, I've been in the deaf community my whole life. Again, about my parents, when my parents met at the Deaf Club, the deaf world is filled with so many levels of deafness. I just found it was interesting that when Ruben gets to this sober house and you see there's so many different deaf people, when you see us having our meals around that big round table, and there's some guys with hearing aids, some without, some that do not speak, some that just read lips. It's hard to explain to somebody in the hearing world that knows nothing about deafness, about all the disparities and all the different levels of deafness that there are. And it's hard for them to understand my world.
When I first lost my hearing, that the question that used to rile me was like, well, how much hearing have you lost? What percentage? What? I'm like, none of that matters, actually.
It doesn't.
We're all struggling with the same challenges. So it's thank you again. I'm going to keep saying thank you because the film, as I say, I've added it to my toolkit. What was your involvement in teaching Riz about American Sign Language and deaf culture? Like, were you his main teacher for that, or how did it work?
No, as a matter of fact, Sophie, no. He had a tutor, a deaf tutor, for like 9 months before I got on set. So he was already conversing with this deaf tutor. And so he knew a lot. So by the time I arrived on the set for my part of the film, which was only 3 weeks, I could see that he was already communicating with the deaf actors on the set. That very last scene that we do together where I'm talking about the stillness, and he comes back after he has the implants in. He shocked me in that scene because I didn't know what he was going to sign, but when he says to me, what does it matter if I disappear? Life just passes. He says it just passes. Doesn't matter. He had his own relationships with every deaf person on that set. So, and Darius, the director, Darius Martyr, made sure that I didn't have to be his teacher at all. We had a relationship as mentor and mentee on a different level, on the stillness part of it, on the trying to be sober part of it. So that's where our relationship really fed the two characters in the movie.
I mean, you mentioned about when cochlear implants first came in and how differently your parents reacted. But obviously now they've come quite a long way. And there's been a lot of other advances in technology and assistive equipment for deaf people. How has that affected the deaf community from where you see it?
In the 80s, there was a shift in the deaf community that I noticed about deaf pride. My father, when I'm growing up in the 50s and 60s, he gave me the feeling that he was broken. I'm deaf. I'm hearing impaired. HI, hearing impaired. And then in the 80s and 90s, I noticed the deaf community was like, wait a second. I'm deaf and I'm proud. I'm a proud deaf woman. I'm a proud deaf man. I'm not broken. You're broken because you don't speak my sign language. So why don't you fix yourself and make yourself accessible? So there's more of an acceptance. Look, it's happening with me even now because I'm a coda and I played this role of a latent deaf man. I've had some flack from the deaf community saying, why did you take a deaf role? Well, he's not really a deaf role. It's a hearing man who becomes deaf. But some deaf actors go, well, I could have done that role. Well, when you read the script, you see that he's speaking through the whole movie without an accent. You wouldn't even know that he was deaf because he just speaks very softly. Everybody's on their journey. God, Sophie, God knows you're on your journey.
Yeah. And I think it's like, I loved in the film when you had the auto captioning plugged in.
Yes.
And like you had no idea how to use it, and you got the one of the other residents to help you set it up. And that did make me chuckle, because with all these bits of technology that, as you say, like they creep in and it shifts and it's gradual. And actually my day job now is working with those who lose their hearing as adults. And often I spend a lot of my time persuading them to engage with, a lot of the time I'm working with older people, like, get a mobile phone and let's work out how to, to make life easier for you.
It's too bad, because you must have loved my hearing dog when my first walk out with the hearing dog. there was a movie can only be so long. There was so much more with the dog that I wish they could have shown in the movie, but they unfortunately have to edit it and cut it. But yes, things like that. Yeah.
But Paul, let's face it, if a dog was in it, that would have just been the star of the show. I hate to say it.
A very old movie actor, W.C. Fields, from when I was a kid, he would always say, dogs and children, he hated them because they're scene stealers, so that is true.
There is a massive underrepresentation of deaf people in film.
Yeah.
Clearly, like, more needs to be done to raise awareness of deafness, and as you say, like, the nuances within the deaf community, because it's a whole massive scale in there, but also like the challenges that deaf people face in the real world. And alongside films like The Silent Child, I don't know whether you saw that a couple of years ago. It was a British film here, very short film. But what message do you hope The Sound of Metal will communicate to audiences, and how do you think we can improve? Sorry, I've got a bit lost in this question because it is really personal.
Oh, I understand. No, I think I understand the question. Yeah.
How do we get more deaf representation out there in the film industry?
I've seen the representation on the screen. Deaf actors do not want to see hearing people playing them on the screen or on the small screen television. If there's a deaf role, I mean, Hollywood has to wake up. I still see it today. A hearing man writes a script. Wouldn't it be fascinating if we made this guy deaf? And then they write a script, and then they start auditioning hearing people who have to learn the language. This is insane. There's deaf actors out there that I know, deaf men and women who are actors, who are brilliant. This is a reminder that what's on that screen up there that we see is not a representation of the world that I live in for blind people, blind deaf people, people that use wheelchairs. Where are they? Well, I see them when I walk out my door. Where are they up there? The agent that I work with here in Los Angeles, she got a script. Somebody wrote a script about a deaf character, and they're auditioning hearing people. Now, so my agent had to tell them, no, this is wrong. You need to realize you got to get some deaf people in there to portray these people. And then they realized, well, that if we did that, we have to get interpreters in the room. We have to spend more money on interpreters. And anyway, these people emailed my agent and said, thank you so much for educating me.
It's relentless, isn't it? But it's when you see that penny drop for people, it's kind of magical. Because you're like, yes, hold on to that.
Yeah.
Go forth and multiply.
You got to keep.
And I think that is the problem, isn't it? There's quite a lot of anger. There's quite a lot of anger that simmers away for the deaf community. And sometimes that comes out the wrong way and it blows those opportunities for education sometimes.
Absolutely. We need to be, it's frustrating. And hearing people just, sometimes they just mindlessly will say something that's insulting, or they'll say something that's ignorant. And I use that word ignorant in the best possible way I can right now, because ignorance can be solved with just a little education and being mindful, expanding the consciousness, expanding the awareness of what your journey is, what my journey has been.
Your character obviously had a hearing dog that appeared very briefly. Did your parents ever have a hearing dog? And do you know anybody that has a hearing dog?
Well, now I know many people have hearing dogs. My parents, we didn't have a hearing. There was no such thing at the time.
Your parents didn't have a hearing dog, but do you have a dog or any?
I have a dog.
You do.
Yes. As a matter of fact, where is she? There she is. Hey, Sheila.
Oh, hi, Sheila. I like her
Sheila.
bow. She's cute.
Yeah, she gets every time she gets a bath, she gets a bandana from her who gives her a bath. But she's a good girl. I'm a big believer in getting rescue dogs, and so we always rescue a dog whenever we can. Every time we lose a dog, I go and I rescue another one. So when I was growing up as a little boy in the 50s, there were no hearing dogs. There was no devices that you could communicate on. There was no captioning in the movies. None of that. When in 1956, I was 9 years old. My mother took me to see a movie that Elvis Presley was in called Love Me Tender. It was a Western. And she took me to the movie around the corner from where we lived. And I quickly realized when we sat down to watch the movie, my mother was not going to understand a damn thing in this movie. There was no open captioning, none of that considerations for anybody. So I ended up interpreting the movie for my mother, all the characters in the movie. That's when I realized, hey, this acting thing is kind of I don't know, I'm acting it out. My mother's watching, I'm singing for her. So there was no sensitivity to that. Now,
it's every day there's progress, but it's like every time you make progress, you find another hole that needs to be filled. So
2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1. Yeah, that old thing. Well, yeah.
So can you tell me a bit more about your ASL rock band?
Oh, well, okay, I'll tell you very briefly. I have a headset on. I have a tight, rockin' ass band. These guys are awesome musicians, and I have a headset on, and I do the whole thing in sign language while I'm singing. So I do it CODA style, child of deaf adult style, and so it's accessible to deaf people and hearing people. And we're playing this weekend. We're driving up to Northern California. We're doing a festival up there. So it's our first gig coming out of this pandemic. So now all the rock clubs are opening up, and I'm very, very excited about it. So hearing people and deaf people really seem to dig it. They love it. And God, this band, it just added years to my life because I just feel like I'm still 25 when I'm up there doing it. So I love it. I hope you are able to see it when we come out there one of these days. And I've got a system that protects my ears so I can hear myself sing. When I was doing it in the 80s, there was no such thing as protection for your ears. So I have that tinnitus going on right now in my ears. But now we have a new invention called in-ear monitors, where you can protect your ears and monitor the amount of sound that's hitting ears. But my band, they've got their little earplugs in there too. So there's things that we can do now to protect. And obviously, Ruben in the movie does not do, because he's hardcore. And I tell people all the time, you may be hardcore, you may be young, but you're not indestructible. You're not invincible. You need to protect what you have right now.
You don't know what you've got till it's gone, is what I say to my musician friends.
Absolutely. You do not know what you've got or what you've lost until you've lost it. Yes, ma'am.
When I first lost my hearing, I got invited to a concert. One of my best friends had like one of her big moments on stage, and I promised her I'd go and support her. But it was really, really difficult for me because there were 4 singers, and 2 out of the 4 singers just looked like they were making no effort at all to me. And afterwards, I got so cross, and I said to her, they were rubbish. She said, but how could you tell? Because you couldn't hear them. And I said, I could just tell by watching them. I could just tell by their body language. And
oh boy.
And now when I talk to musicians, I'm like, it's your body language and your performance is the like universal language that everybody understands. Paul, what do you think's been your proudest achievement and the highlight of your career so far?
My proudest achievement is just to have been able to accept myself. I've always, I've had addiction struggles. I've had struggles and problems that I've had since coming back from Vietnam. My identity in the deaf community. Who am I? I'm not deaf, but I'm not hearing. I grew up in the deaf club, and yet there's that elitism of, you're not deaf. I love what I've achieved with my band more than anything. When I see 40 deaf people in a hard rock club having access to Black Sabbath, I'm very, very, very happy. I'm thrilled. But that's because I've accepted who I am. I love who I am. I love what I do. That's taken me, Sophie, that's taken me a long time to get to this point. So I'm just happy I'm alive. I got a feeling I'm going to be here for, like I said, it's just added years to my life. And so that's my proudest achievement, that I've accepted that I'm a coda. I love it.
And like educated so many people in that process, which like, quite frankly, from where I'm sitting, you can forget the Oscar nomination, because that is such an achievement to like the education through everything that you've been doing is just like amazing. Something for me to aspire to, I think. So I could literally sit here and talk to you all evening, Paul, and hearing dogs often tell me off because I do like talks and things to educate people about the charity. And I can talk for hours and hours when I get onto hearing loss because I'm so passionate about it. But I have asked all the questions that we wanted to ask you today. So thank you so much for your time in talking to me and accepting an interview from a rookie.
Oh, you've been great. Now, this has been absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.
Believe me.